Three things faster than a Giannis Antetokounmpo free throw attempt. Watching the wrong paint dry because your eccentric cat-loving neighbor stops by to tell you another long-winded tale about one of her countless tabbies. And all the while, at least 24 times, you've been repeatedly telling your kid to take old Rover for a walk. Now! Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Sports History here on Park Ridge Channel. I'd like to, obviously ahead of the curve, apologize to all the Greek American sports fans out there who are following the NBA playoffs right now over probably my mispronunciation of Giannis the Greek Freak. And I am not going to pronounce his last name again because I am going to get so tongue-tied and twisted that I'd rather talk about his twisting moves to the goal and his magnificent play rather than me mispronounce and maybe offend some of the viewers in the audience. Believe me, I'm not. But his play has propelled the Bucks to within just a couple of games of potentially getting to the NBA Finals for the first time in a long time in the Bucks franchise history. And that's really what I'm going to focus on in the first half of the show are the four teams that are vying for the NBA championship, with two spots obviously in the championship really going to at least all four teams either being their first trip to the finals or another chance at their first championship, or for the other two, and I'm talking about the Hawks and the Bucks, their chance to end, let's say, a long time, more than decades. And we've talked about this with the Hawks of when they won a championship in their history. The Hawks, just to give you an idea, have not won since 57 and 58. 1957-58 season. And we did a show a couple of weeks ago about their futility after beating the Celtics and Bill Russell in the championship and then just coming up dry for years and years. In fact, we had made mention that the Celtics have eliminated the Hawks 9 times on prior occasions in the playoffs. So after being steamrolled by them in the 57-58 season or being stung by them, the Celtics have really paid it back and really nailed the Hawks every time they seem to have met them in the playoffs. And then, of course, you have the Milwaukee Bucks, who have not been to the NBA championship since the 70-71 season. And that was led by Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And that 70-71 team defeated the Baltimore Bullets. Yeah, the Baltimore Bullets in a sweep, 4-0. But they have not sniffed the championship title round in years. And so now they're going for their first title and ending their kind of curse since the 70-71 season, 50 seasons of play. So that's why it's so important that they get to the championship. And, of course, you have the Phoenix Suns, who've been there twice but come up short, both times losing in 6 games, both times really losing to dynasty teams. You have the Boston Celtics of the 70s, and then of course, the Chicago Bulls of the Michael Jordan dynasty and Scottie Pippen. I don't mean he had a huge hand in those efforts for the Chicago Bulls. So they're trying to get back for the first time since 93. And of course, the Clippers, who have never been there in their franchise history. And this goes all the way back to the 70-71 season when they were in Buffalo playing as the Buffalo Braves. So I'd like to do, some fun things with those particular franchises. And the first one I'd like to talk about, of course, is the Milwaukee Bucks. And of course, I love to get the pictures or the Topps basketball cards, although I do have something different down here. And that is the basketball cards from the 69-70 season. On the far right here is Connie Hawkins. I did put him up, but of course, here is Lou Alcindor, who becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And that's something I'd love to be able to talk to basketball card collectors. I can't remember the first time, or is this the only card that Lou Alcindor has the name Lou Alcindor on it? Or did he have it the following year as well? I have to take a look at that. Many times I'm doing these shows and I'll come up with something, as you can see, I'll be thinking, hey, listen, when was the last time this? And when was the last time that? And as I'm talking on this show, some other things hit me. And for the card collectors, I know they probably have the answer to that on the tip of their tongue. But I am pretty sure that Alcindor becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar during the 70-71 season. Because I can remember watching a game between the Bulls and the Bucks on ABC when they would show one game a week. And in fact, I can't even remember. It was a blowout game. Jabbar scored 33, actually had gotten some death threats prior to the game. It was played in Chicago, I believe. But anyway, he was being called Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at that point, not Lou Alcindor. So I think maybe he's only Lou Alcindor for the first 2 years of his career and then becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. But like I said, I don't remember his basketball card other than this first year or second year, as it is, of Lou Alcindor being called Lou Alcindor. Interesting. But anyway, with that Bucks team in the 70 season, or actually their first year in, they did not have, obviously, Lou Alcindor. They were lousy. They were probably one of the first teams playing for a number one draft pick, hopefully being, of course, Lou Alcindor out of UCLA. Probably, when you think about it, the greatest college player of all time. 3 national titles. Remember, he couldn't play as a freshman. They won all 3 years, had an unbelievable winning streak in college that was stopped by Houston and Elvin Hayes. But nevertheless, the Bruins get their revenge in the semifinals of the 68 season and defeat Houston, blew them out, and then continue on with another title for John Wooden. But anyway, that first team only won 16 games. I never realized this. Their leading scorer was Flynn Robinson. And now I wish I had a picture of Flynn. Actually, I think I did use one year in episodes ago of Flynn Robinson. But Flynn Robinson, it plays a significant part in the Bucks championship season because he is traded to the Cincinnati Royals for Oscar Robertson. And then Oscar Robertson is really probably the final brick in the Bucks title run as the Royals send the aging vet who could, just like in baseball, give them some minutes. Actually played really well for the Bucks that year. And I think he played the following year as well. But he helps the Milwaukee Bucks secure their first NBA championship. And Flynn Robinson has a role in it, not on the court, but off, as he is traded to the Cincinnati Royals and never becomes the player that I believe that Royal management was hoping. Anyway, getting to that 70-71 season, they win 66 games. People don't realize this, that their first coach was a guy by the name of Larry Costello. And I believe he coached at Niagara prior to this. But he came in, they took the hits, but they were able to secure Jabbar. And that 69-70 season, Willis Reed outplayed Lou Alcindor, defeat the Bucks to get to the championship round, where really Reed does a magnificent job holding really Chamberlain, and they really to kind of levels of just star instead of superstar that Chamberlain was. And of course, how can any Knicks fans forget Willis's unbelievable 3 minutes of action in Game 7, where he just whipped the Garden into such a hysteria, and hitting his first 2 shots and only 2 shots that he takes that night, and really propels the Knicks to the championship. What people forget is that Walt Frazier probably had his greatest single night as a NBA player. scoring over 40 points, having a ton of assists, a number of steals, and really the Knicks blow out the Lakers. I think it was 114-98 as the final, but it wasn't even that close. But that was all the doing of Willis Reed coming on after an injury. But that season with Kareem, here's the interesting thing. They had Oscar Robertson. Never realized this until now. Oscar Robertson was born, I was born on the same day, years apart, as Oscar Robertson, November 24th. I feel really special now that he was born because he was one of our favorite players growing up. My brother was a Cincinnati Royals fan. It's amazing. My brother Jim rooted for everything in Cincinnati, so he was a Royals fan and a Reds fan. He told me he would have been a Bengals fan had they been a team then, but because Dallas, he was a Cowboy fan growing up, and of course I followed through with him. He never liked the local teams, and he couldn't stand the Giants for whatever reason. So he picked rooting for the Cowboys. And the first few years there, they took a walloping. But eventually they got the championship, and with Roger Staubach, one of my favorite players in the NBA, in the NFL of all time. But anyway, Oscar Robertson was one of our fan favorites. And Oscar does finally secure his own NBA championship, winning with the Bucks. And that year, it's amazing. Ready for this? Abdul-Jabbar scored 31.7 a game, 30 points a game, and Oscar scored 19. Incredible. On that winning team, I do remember, for the most part, the starting five. They had Jabbar, Robertson. I'm just going to read them off to save some time. Bobby Dandridge, who would go to the Bullets and actually help them win a championship. John McLaughlin, who was a 15-point scorer for them that year. And a guy who I did not know was Greg Smith. I do remember Bob Boozer because I think he played for the Bulls, and I think he might have played for the Sixers. But my favorite player on this team, without a doubt, was a guy named McCoy McLemore. And I'm just saying this now because to have a name with two MCs to start it, Mick and Mick, I think is pretty incredible. But that was really the starting five. So it was Jabbar, Robertson, Dandridge, McLaughlin, and Smith. I got to be honest with you, I never realized McLaughlin played so many minutes for the Bucks. I always thought he was kind of like a super sub. Maybe what happens is he does become like a sixth player off, but he reminded me of a poor man's version of John Havlicek. Lo and behold, he really was a better player than that. Not a great player, but definitely a guy that could help you win championships. And this just proves it. Helps contribute to winning ways for the Bucks and really gets them. You know, the Bucks started off with a lousy record. McLaughlin was there that first year with the Bucks. In fact, I was thinking that he might have been their leading scorer their first year. And of course, what don't I have? I don't have a picture of John McLaughlin, but on that team, McLaughlin, oh no, I'm sorry, it was Flynn Robinson, I just said, but McLaughlin was their second leading scorer. What am I thinking? He was 19.6, but he played 80 games and Robinson only played 65. Ready for this? Here are their top five players for their original team. John McLaughlin, Flynn Robinson, Wayne Embry, Fred Hetzel, who scored 15 points, played 53 games, and Zaid Abdul-Aziz, who scored 11. And then they had coming off the bench a guy named Len Chappell, who scored 14, Guy Rogers with 10, and Dave Gamby with 12. Fast forward, and we just did the 70-71 team. This was the difference. You have Jabbar, and you have Robertson, Bobby Dandridge, John McLaughlin, and Greg Smith. But they do have a guy by the name of Lucius Allen, who did play at UCLA, played in 61 games and scored 7 points a game for that team. Lucius would elevate his game and would be eventually a starter for the Bucks, but not on that championship team. Okay, next guy is Connie Hawkins. And here's the deal with Hawkins. Hawkins was a great ABA player. In fact, he led the Pittsburgh Pipers to the first ABA championship. And then, of course, he plays for the Minnesota Pipers because they moved. Pittsburgh moved. And here's the deal. They win the championship in 1968 as the Pittsburgh Pipers. And then they win a title in 1968 as the Pittsburgh Pirates. They beat the New Orleans Buccaneers. And then in 69, they moved to Minneapolis and they become the Minneapolis Pipers. And they lost in the first round of the ABA. Okay? So then he jumps. And you have to remember that Connie Hawkins kind of had a controversial career at Iowa. I do remember him writing a book about growing up in New York, playing at Iowa. There was some controversies at Iowa. And then he jumps to the ABA and becomes one of their first marquee names, Connie Hawkins. He was a really good ball player. I just remember him having enormous hands, and him, guards would throw the ball into him, and he would just hold the ball like this, extended, and the ball in his hand looked like me holding a softball. It was really, really incredible, the enormity of his hands. Anyway, Hawkins was a really good player. Probably this. Had he played with they had just gotten him a couple of other pieces, who knows what they could have done. But he averaged. Hawkins scored. I'm just using my basketball references here. And I'm using the wrong thing here. Let me just see. I'm moving up because they do all things. These are tremendous. These sports references that I use, basketball, baseball, etc. But on that Pittsburgh Piper team, he made 5 All-Star teams, 3 in the NBA. But his career was done by 1975-76, age 33. He did score 26 his first year, 26.8, then 30.2, then 24.6 with Phoenix in 69-70, and then 20.9, then 21. And then kind of went down. I know he had some injuries, and you would have to say he finished his career with Atlanta. Interestingly enough, he does play for the Lakers, but not in their glory years. His injuries probably hampered a great career. He is in the Hall of Fame. I think what really made him is, I think that the writers probably in the NBA are a little bit different from the MLB in this. It's almost like with players like Connie Hawkins, they say, hey, without the injuries, what kind of a player would he been? And they probably say they measure him on his great years when he averaged, 26 and 30 points in the ABA and then coming over to the NBA and basically averaging 25 for Phoenix. And they said, no, he definitely I'm just guessing, probably would have averaged 25 for his whole career, probably would have played 15 years instead of 8 or 10. And he probably would have been out of the game at age 37 and maybe have even had a championship ring to boot. So that's how they judge it. All right, but the Suns finally do break, and they do it with a rookie by the name of Alvin Adams. Now, the reason why he always stood out for me, he does make the cover of Sports Illustrated, as does Gar Hurd, who plays a significant role in Game 6 of the NBA Finals when the Suns played the Boston Celtics. He hit a shot almost from midcourt turnaround. It wasn't, in the days before the 3 points, it probably, if the 3-point had been in effect, the Suns would have won Game 5. As it was, it only tied up the game and sent it into overtime. And of course, that game was just a great game, but it was marred by kind of fans rushing onto the court and really torpedoing Mendy Rudolph, who was one of the referees in that game. They basically rioted on the court when you think about it. But number of things stand out in that game, and it was the Gar Hurd shot that sends it into overtime. Here he is making the cover of SI. Alvin Adams had made the cover of SI. I always got a kick out of him that he spelled Alvin with 2 A's instead of A and an I. But he played for John McLeod, I believe, at Oklahoma. Then McLeod goes to the Suns and coaches them for about 14 years. And he was the coach of the Phoenix Suns in their first championship run in 1975-76. Down here for the Braves, this is Bobkaufman. He is their leading scorer on their first team in Buffalo. And you can see that the Braves originally were black and orange, kind of like the Portland Trailblazers. They do have a great logo with a bee and a feather through it, but then they changed their colors to blue, kind of like a North Carolina light blue, then a dark blue with a tinge of either orange or red. But they stayed the Braves until they move out to San Diego and become the Clippers. And, of course, they tried to get lightning in the bottle by getting Bill Walton, but he was always hurt for them as well. Their big player out in San Diego was a guy by the name of Randy Smith. And I just remember Randy Smith setting the record at the time of most consecutive starts in the NBA with some 900 odd starts in a row, 900 odd starts in a row. But he was their big player from Buffalo into transitioning to San Diego. But Bobkaufman was actually their leading scorer their first year. And they were not good. But those Buffalo Braves teams get 2 players. They get Bob McAdoo and a guy from Providence College by the name of Ernie DiGregorio. That one I can pronounce. And boy, for many years, there were many people who thought, wow, this guy, he reminds you so much of Bob Cousy with his behind-the-back passes, just kind of his frenetic play. Just an exciting ball player, both at Providence and for his first couple of years with the Buffalo Braves. In fact, I do believe that he wins Rookie of the Year his first year. And, of course, McAdoo with a strange jump shot. In fact, I used to mirror it because I couldn't do a one-handed shot until I got a little bit bigger. But I used to throw it up kind of like Bob McAdoo. I don't know how he got a high percentage on shot, but he led the league in scoring for a number of years. He was really, people say very one-dimensional. He never played defense and stuff, but he was an exciting ball player. And those Braves teams in the early 70s, when you had McAdoo leading that team, they were quite exciting. They lost a couple of times to the Washington and Capitol Bullets in the playoffs. It would have been fun to see McAdoo with the Braves get into a finals. And that was when and look, I'll tell you this, a lot of NBA fans will remember this. I remember about 74, 75, and then the 75, 76 season where they would play one game and then be off for 3, and then play game 2 and be off for 3. They stretched out the playoffs over weeks. Now at least you're playing every other day. Maybe you take a 2-day break for travel. But when I was in high school, I just remember that they stretched the playoffs for enormous amounts of time between games. And it kind of ruined the momentum of each series. But Garherd, and in fact, Garherd was on, I believe, some of those early Braves teams with, had to be because that's him in a Braves uniform with Bob McAdoo. And of course, the last guy I want to talk about, the Atlanta Hawks, I just want to bring him up, and that is Pete Maravich. And the only reason I bring this up, they claim that this is a 6970 card. And more than likely it is. But know this, and I did the research on this. Maravich was still in school in 6970 at LSU. I know this for a fact because he played in the NIT. And my cousin, Tim Mercier, who played for Georgetown, off the bench, I just remember him appearing in the game. And I always like to say this. My cousin held Maravich to only 2 points. This is when Maravich was averaging 44 plus a game. And I would like to say, yeah, he held Maravich when he was in there to just 2 points. And all my buddies would be, wow, amazed. I said, but of course he scored 42 against the rest of the Georgetown team. And that LSU team beat Georgetown by 1 point. I remember watching that game on TV. I believe CBS was carrying the NIT, which was just as big then, or was kind of coming down in stature, let's just say that, to the NCAA tournament. The NCAA tournament was only for 25 teams at that point. By 75, 76, the NCAA realized what they had, expanded it, tried to drive the NIT out of existence. Haven't. They have made the NIT kind of into a secondary tournament now, where you go kind of beef up your work. It's kind of like a postseason, preseason tournament for next year. But it's still a lot of fun. But Maravich, here's his card from 1969-70. Now, I'm pretty sure this might be 70-71 because that's his rookie season. And, of course, Maravich, many people will say this, he was kind of ahead of his times with the players. It would kind of like being putting Magic Johnson with the Atlanta Hawks of 70-71. I think kind of that's really a poor sign. It's kind of what happened to Maravich. I mean, if you ever see the highlight reels, he could spin the ball between his legs, do razzmatazz, all the rest of it. And if you were playing a pickup game, he would just overwhelm you. You wouldn't know where the ball was. Not just the defense, but his own offensive players as well. And I think that's what happened with him early in his career. Had some all-star seasons, no question. But I think had maybe if the Hawks had gotten players more suitable to Maravich play, you might have heard from the Hawks more and more in the playoffs. But that is it in a nutshell. So what you're hearing right now is this. You have 4 teams. There's going to be history made some way, somehow. Either one of the teams ending their long drought from championships, that's the Bucks and the Atlanta Hawks, or one team finally winning after a number of trips, that could be the Suns, or a team finally getting there and not just hoisting their first championship, but for hoisting their first championship in their first appearance in the NBA, and that would be the Los Angeles Clippers / San Diego Clippers / Buffalo Braves. So it should be kind of interesting. All right, second thing I want to show you, another cartoon, and this has everything to do with spider tack. We're talking about foreign substances on a baseball, and you thought it was just spider tack on the ball. Yuck. I'm going to start with the batter's pine tar. Well, see George Brett. Every Yankee fan remembers every July 24th, I believe, when George Brett hits a home run that appears to put the Royals in front in a game against the Yankees, the hated Yankees. That was a great rivalry, the Royals and the Yankees in the late 70s, early 80s. And Martin came out after Greg Nettles had notified him that Brett's bat had pine tar above the limit. And, of course, the umpire ruled it an out and threw out Brett after he went berserk. So there is pine tar on a baseball. Wood fibers from the ash and maple bats. Yes. Ted Williams used to say that there was a smell when he hit a ball really hard, and it was the wood burning from the friction probably. People didn't really believe him, but when they say you smoked a ball, you are meaning it because you're putting so much friction. Well, there's got to be some wood fibers, even splinters from the ball when you hit it. And then, of course, sunscreen. Yes, there are players who apply suntan lotion so they don't get burnt. And, of course, suntan lotion also has alcohol in it, kind of dries your fingers, but it also is a lotion. And sometimes they might rub it inadvertently on the ball. Fingerprints of at least the pitcher on the mound, the umpire behind the plate, or the catcher. And yes, no matter what you do, oils on your hand are getting on the baseball. It is cowhide or horsehide. It's going to accept those oils, human sweat, bacteria, and other things we won't mention. Grass stains and pollen. I would agree with that. Now, Most of the balls, and you're going to find this out later, are tossed if they have markings on them or they look a little stained or dull. Mustard, ketchup, or other condiments. Hey, foul balls go into the stands, and handled by the fans. Sometimes they're not handled by the fans, and the mustard just cakes on the ball. Of course, they are just out of play as well. Infield and outfield dirt. Balls actually get scratched after use, but they are filled with some dirt. Baseball rubbing mud from the Delaware River. This is kind of cool because I would like to do in a future episode is the science of baseball that way. And I'm not just talking about launch angle. I'm talking about the actual rudiments of the game. And one of them is that the baseball, there is mud extracted from the Delaware River. And I believe it's on this side, on the Jersey side. And it's done by one family. It's been done for years and years. Location remains a secret, kind of like the Coca-Cola formula. And this type of mud is rubbed on the ball to give it, or to give the players a little bit of, lack of a better word, traction or grip on the ball. Then, synthetic rubber dots. Yes, those little granules, they're made out of tires. And if you've ever played on an artificial turf field, you'll know what I'm talking about. The rubber pellets look like other things, and I won't mention them now, but they get into your socks, they get into your shoes, into your gloves if you're wearing batting gloves, everywhere. You walk off the field and you're saying, what are all these little pellets? Well, that's recycled rubber tires that are used on the synthetic turfs. Now, there aren't too many synthetic or artificial surfaces in baseball. I know that the Texas Rangers, and I know that they have the ability to play indoors with the roof and stuff, but they have a synthetic turf, which is kind of disappointing. And by the way, yes, you can throw all kinds of slings and arrows at me that I kind of said, look out for the Texas Rangers. They have not performed like I thought, but hey, just don't get any stock tips from me either, because I was way wrong. The Texas Rangers have been woeful, and I really thought that they might get a spurt playing ball in front of crowds faster than the rest of the teams due to the pandemic. And then the final thing, viruses and bacteria from the field, the locker room, the stands, etc. So the fun part of this, there are foreign substances on the ball all the time. And some of them are human. Some of them are environment. Some of them are animal. Some of them we cannot, or artificial, and still others we cannot control. They're part of the flora and fauna of the environment in which we play. That being said, I would like to mention and talk about this. There is a history of the spitball or the grease ball or whatever you want to talk about, doctoring the baseball. And it really has elements in a tragic story, and that is Carl Mays and Ray Chapman. Carl Mays was a baseball pitcher in the early 20s for the New York Yankees. There is a book about the incident, and real quick, Carl Mays had a unique windup and pitching motion. Maybe it was a little bit more orthodox at the time, but you can see how he almost like submarines the pitch. And here's a baseball picture of him. And of course, on that day in August 1920, one of these baseballs, and I'm going to give you a little context about it as well, hit a very good player during one of his better seasons, Ray Chapman, in the temple. Chapman started to walk away from the beating, but then collapsed and died 12 hours later in a New York City hospital. This, of course, is the baseball. I believe it's up in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Not one of baseball's best memories, but I do like the fact that baseball shows all of its history at Cooperstown, because we learn from even our tragedies. Now, Ray Chapman, I've read articles on this, and I'm not going to go into it in much depth, but I know this, that Ray Chapman's death did affect Carl Mays. I don't think he had a history of being a head hunter. Of course, he did plunk hitters just like any pitcher does. Some balls, the baseball, sometimes they do slip and slide. I use I do use pine tar when I'm playing. So, and by the way, I've been wearing a green jersey. Let me just stand up here. This is my softball, a softball team I'm part of. 50 years going strong. So I just want to put a shout out to all the members of the Kelly's Heroes softball team, of which my son, my brother, my nephews are all a part of. We go back to grammar school, some of us, playing ball. And the team has been together for over 50 years. I think we still have an original member on the team. So what's good is that my son and my nephew brought the average age from 95 down to about 78. But we're still going strong. And just a special shout out. That's why I've been wearing the green jersey, Kelly's Heroes. So I'm standing up for them right now. Anyway, getting back, here's Ray Chapman, Carl Mays. It was a real tragedy. And one of the things that baseball learned, I do believe that the time of the beaming was this. It was late in the day. I think it was the second game of a doubleheader, but you got to remember, there were no lights. So it was getting progressively darker. Remember, in August, the sun goes down much earlier than it does in June. Anyway, they didn't replace the balls if they got marred or messed or dirty. And apparently, the ball that Mays threw, Chapman claims he never saw coming and got hit in the head. Now you see, baseball is constantly being tossed from the game. They have a little mark on it, and it's being tossed from the game. But years ago, baseball was, I guess, a little bit more cost-conscious about the equipment. And it's not a laughing matter. It's just that they didn't really, and in context of the time, they probably didn't have available all the equipment that they do today in abundance. Anyway, the ball that Mays threw was apparently very dirty. And in a little bit less light, maybe it was twilight, that ball is hard to see, especially if it's coming at you at 80, 90 miles an hour. And you recall Ray Chapman and the rest, there was no such thing as batting helmets then. And you can see that there's no protection between his ear and obviously the bill of his hat. And unfortunately, Mays hit him. That probably was the initiation or the genesis of getting rid of the spitball, the grease ball, the dirty ball, all the rest of it. To the point that in baseball, and I found this on a nice website, it's JimPresley.com. He actually did an article on Burley Grimes, who was the last official pitcher to be allowed to throw a spitball. And of course, these pitchers, it's amazing. Give credit to players, all the rest of it. And that is that here's Burley Grimes, last pitcher to actually throw a spitball that was allowed. And it's amazing. The article goes on to say that, he had a pretty good career, Hall of Famer, Burley Grimes, pitched for a number of teams, obviously. He pitched for Brooklyn, Pittsburgh, the Giants, back to Pittsburgh, the Cardinals, the Cubbies, and finished with St. Louis and the Yankees. Won 270 games. As many games, as the author points out, Jim Presley, as Mike Mussina, who's just been inducted in the Hall of Fame last couple of years. 270, 212 was his career record. 560 winning percentage, 3.53 ERA. He won 25 and 22 games, lost 19, both all three lead the league. He had a 676 winning percentage in 1920 with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Never led the league in ERA. In fact, interestingly enough, it looks like 2.13 is his lowest ERA. It does swell to his last year, 7.24. But he pitched a ton of innings. Ready for this? He pitched over 300 innings 6 times in his career. 6 times. Different type of thing. But I have to bring this up. So that's Burley Grimes, the last guy to throw spitball that was legal. Of course, that brings me up to this guy. Now, he's never been caught throwing a foreign substance baseball, let's just say. And I think I'm going to save a little bit of Gaylord Perry for our next show or a future show. The reason I bring him up is the number of teams that even Perry played for. And of course, I had to show this. He had a brother, Jim Perry. Both make the All-Star team. I don't know if they ever made the same All-Star team. I'm going to look that up. If they both made the All-Star team the same year. Yes, 1970, which is, I have a picture of the Perry brothers in a future thing, and it must be Riverfront Stadium that they're at because they make the All-Star team together. They may have made it in 1974 as well. But there's Gaylord Perry with a number of teams, and he always looked old, doesn't he? He always looked like he's permanently 50. These are early 60s cards. And he looks that way. So we'll get to him in a future edition because he is a lot of fun. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you again for joining me. Shout out to Howard Fredericks for, again, giving me an idea when we were emailing one another about a future show. So thanks very much, Howard. Everyone have a good week, and I'll see you here next time.